Hi, this is Randall Schwartz, host of Floss Weekly. This week, Simon Phipps joins me. We're going to talk about SugarCRM, a customer relations manager used by small and large organizations all over the world. That's coming up next, so stay tuned.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Floss Weekly is provided by CacheFly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Floss Weekly with Randall Schwartz and Simon Phipps, episode 222, recorded August 15th, 2012, SugarCRM. It's time for Floss Weekly, the show about free, libre, open source software. I am your host, Randall Schwartz, Merlin at Stonehenge.com. .com. There we go. Back this week with a voice that almost works. I do so sincerely want to apologize for the scruffiness of my voice last week. It was so painful that I even couldn't listen to it without cracking up at least once or twice. But anyway, I'm back. And we also have our co-host, the same co-host as last week, but always welcome here at the show, Simon Phipps. Welcome back to the show.
It's great to be back, Rand. I think I might have caught your sore throat. I'm beginning to get a kind of a raw feeling here. I don't know whether you can whether it's actually a computer virus you had.
Oh, well, you never know. And it might be the kind of virus that, maybe that's a new protocol, like virus transmit protocol or something. And maybe only Skype users get it or something. That would be really strange. But we have a really great show this week. We have a guest on from the SugarCRM project, John Mertic, who is the community manager for SugarCRM. We'll be chatting with him about the open source components of SugarCRM and how that all fits together with what they do for their commercial side of the house. I don't like to repeat things, but we did SugarCRM so long ago on Floss Weekly, episode 32. I don't know if any of you have actually been listening that long. I know I had to go way back in my archives to go listen to the previous show. But they've apparently been moving forward in the open source community about the stuff since the last time we talked to them. So they wanted a chance to come back on and kind of talk about the new ways that they're embracing the open source community. So I thought, hey, well, let's go ahead and do that. Also, I didn't have anybody else for this week yet, so I thought, let's just put them in. No, really. I respect everybody who comes on this show. Simon, what do you know about SugarCRM?
Well, I actually evaluated SugarCRM for the startup that I was working with last year, and I've had lots of conversations with their founders and with their current management about their open source basis. So I've had quite a long exposure to them, and they're one of the great projects of the open source world, up there with MySQL in validating the open source business model for the world. So I'm going to be interested to find out where they've got to and how they're tracking that open source ideal.
Yeah, and then so I actually mentioned what SugarCRM is. It's a CRM. It's a customer relations management system. So it allows a company to keep track of what's happening in terms of sales and marketing. So like where are your work going in terms of reaching people out there, and once you have a customer, how many things has he bought, what kind of feedback has he given to you, and who's working him, and so on. So sounds like a really interesting project. And so I think, let me look at my notes. See, I guess that's probably all there is to do. Without further ado, let's go ahead and bring on our guest. John Mertic, welcome to the show.
Hi, Randall. Glad to be on the show. I'm a huge fan. I think I've probably seen about every episode thus far, so I'm really excited to be a part of it.
Wow, so you may have seen even more than I have. I don't know that I've watched every episode, but very good, very good. And where are you speaking to us from?
I'm in a little town called Doylestown, Ohio. It's just southwest of Akron, hometown of LeBron James and the rubber industry of America.
I think I've flown over that city many times.
Who hasn't, really?
Yes.
Flyover country.
On my way to the East Coast. Well, I gave we did a show on SugarCRM many years ago. I can say this literally back Floss Weekly number 32, and I reviewed that show a little bit last night, and I think I gave a decent introduction to SugarCRM at the beginning of the show, but let's hear it right from you. What is SugarCRM, and what problem does it solve?
So SugarCRM is a commercial open source CRM software, CRM standing for customer relationship management. And really the problem attempting to solve is how to manage the relationships you have with your customers. Whether it would be, I'm selling to them, whether it be the lead process. If, I'm a new customer is coming to me, I'm looking how I can sell something to them, even how I can support them or how I can market to them. It's bringing all of those sorts of relationships under one roof so you can kind of visualize it in one place of how to work with it, and go from there.
So for somebody like me that runs a small business and I have only a handful of clients, I might do this by just having like little sticky notes or the equivalent of sticky notes electronically now to manage all this. But at what point does it make sense to actually have a formal system for all this?
Well, it's really interesting because a lot of the customers that come to us are doing exactly what you're saying, Randall, is they have their CRM consists of a series of Excel spreadsheets that has all of their customer information listed out in it, with name, address, all of those things, maybe some notes about it. And, at some point, once you get enough customers, it's tough to stay on top of that. It's tough to do anything about it, to work or keep it maintained. But even the bigger deal is that you really can't do too much intelligence from. Like, for example, as you're bringing a new customer board, it might need to pass through several different departments. It might need to, you might have some automation tasks that you want to do there. And that's actually where a full-fledged CRM software really, really comes in handy, is you can kind of, as opposed to having, dead sort of static data that might sit in a spreadsheet, instead, you can have live data that you can interact with, you can build relationships with, and do all sorts of really neat, interesting things, and really kind of, visualize what your customer's relationship is, as opposed to just having sticky notes of knowing, who they are.
Okay, and so what's the transition like to get into something like this, and how complex would this be to configure for a small or medium-sized business?
It's actually not that hard at all. I mean, really, the biggest issue, there's two things that come to play. One is the data migration, which, we kind of support, migrating from CSV files and whatnot. And actually, the nice thing is being an open solution. We use, MySQL or a number of other databases on the back end. So really, it's just a matter of just getting the data into there, and having a web host to set it up and run with it. But then the other half is the training. And it's really interesting because if you look at like CRM and even outside of Sugar, but just CRM deployments across the board, the far and away, issue is training and getting somebody up on board using it. We designed the software to put the user first, which is a very kind of stark contrast to CRM, how it has been historically. Probably the really the biggest initial CRM software out there is Siebel. And it's still going strong today, although starting to decline. But Siebel was a system designed around how a company could basically keep its thumb on its salespeople and know what they're doing, what their numbers are, what their workflow. It's basically a way to manage salespeople. But in no way was it ever actually designed for a salesperson to actually, help and augment their job and make it a lot easier and show them value. And so we've kind of taken the flip approach, is we actually design a product from the user's perspective of how do we make them successful? How do we make it as easy as possible for them to use the system, get moving with it, and really, find it is actually easier to use Sugar than, having sticky notes or having Excel spreadsheets or trying to manage it in their email client or whatnot. So we did it from that perspective to make it very, very easy to get going.
So maybe as a good analogy there, it'd be like the difference between putting a GPS tracker in every one of your shipping trucks, just so you can watch it on a big board all the time about where all your trucks are, versus actually putting a GPS turn-by-turn instructions in each of the trucks, so they can also figure out some better way to get around.
Exactly. It's, it's really interesting because back in the day, people probably, there was this natural kind of split where people, thought, hey, the salespeople, they're a cost center to us. So we really have to keep our thumb on them to make sure that they're, in line and they're not, wasting away the company's money. And furthermore, how profitable are they? Are they really good salespeople and things like that? Where never, like you're saying, never at any point was it's, well, how do I make it easier for them to actually make a sale? Or how do I make it easier for them, even in the bigger, scope of things, to maintain a relationship with a customer? And that's the one thing that, we aim to kind of really solve that, not really a lot of other CRM products on the market do.
So what's the history of SugarCRM and why did it end up being open source?
It was actually originally conceived as open source. So there was a trio of great gentlemen, John Roberts, who did the interview last time on FLOSS, too. Jacob Taylor and Clint Oram were basically CRM veterans in the industry, and really were looking to find a better way to build software. And they looked on the landscape, and they saw kind of this core problem of, CRM today it's this big, huge, monolithic, painful to use software that really was never designed with the user in mind. It was always designed for for sales management, basically, and executives to kind of keep a tab of their company. So they decided, let's kind of change that equation, but let's use the open source philosophy to actually help build this software. And their thoughts of, by keeping the software open, it really makes it easier to integrate into your business. Because if you think about it, like everybody, oftentimes if you go to like Office Max or Staples for people in the US, you'd go there, you'd buy a copy of ACT or some sort of other, piece of software there, and you would think, okay, that's CRM software. It's very straightforward and clear cut and clean. But the interesting reality is everybody, how they do it inside their company is very unique. And every industry, how they approach the problem is very unique. The core problem's still there. You're a company, you have customers, but those customers might be different sorts of entities. So, if you have a retail store, your customers are, people. My father-in-law, he owns a pool business. His customer can be people, or they can be, enterprises or other corporations that he's working with. If you're in healthcare, which is a big, segment that CRM is starting to come up with, they're patients. And in each sort of segment, how you do the interaction is very different. So by kind of imposing one view of CRM on somebody, it really kind of limits what they're able to do, and it makes it a lot more difficult. In the end, you're kind of wrapping your company around of a solution, versus the approach Sugar takes is Sugar wraps its solution around you. We make our product as easy and flexible as possible so that you can work it into your organization and use the tools that you're already using, and just have Sugar interact with them to grab data.
Right. Now, so John, you're describing SugarCRM there as open source. Could you tell us a little bit more about the open source basis for SugarCRM? What license it's on, what's the governance for the community?
So great question. So we have multiple editions of the product, and our base edition is our community edition, which is under an AGPL v3 license. And then we have commercial versions built on top of it. And, classically in the open source world, this is kind of viewed as a very open core model, right? Because you have the core part of the application, which is open source, and there's commercial extensions that build upon that. Now, there's some kind of interesting things about this. One, if you look at our top level edition, which is called Sugar, has all the commercial code along with our open source code, there's about, and I don't know the exact figure off the top of my head, but about a 70-80% code commonality between our base open source edition and our highest end ultimate edition, which is kind of a very interesting thing. And if you actually take a look at the feature set between them, the core platform pieces of the product are similar across it. They're built off of the exact same code base. So there's no real differences there. Really, the differences when you get to the higher editions are, additional functionality that kind of makes sense for that market segment. So, for example, our Pro Edition adds support for team support. So if you're in a larger organization, so you can break your company into teams and everything, and you can do role and ACL management that way. That's one example of a feature. Our higher end enterprise editions, have support for DB2 and Oracle, for example. That's something that the lower end of the market probably isn't as concerned with, but the enterprise level is very concerned with having things like that.
Right.
Go ahead.
Well, so I'm listening to what you're commenting on there. So it seems that what you've decided to do is to differentiate based on whether the user is a very large user, and to allow software freedom to small companies, but to not allow larger companies to enjoy software freedom. Does that summarize your approach here?
So that's an interesting perspective. That's one way to look at it. I think a better way to look at it is, we don't really put any restrictions on the CE version. We provide a core set of functionality for CRM. And the actual interesting thing is if you go out to our community, there's a number of projects that will go and add on pretty much all the features and functionalities that our commercial editions have that that our open source edition does not have with it. So we really don't put any restrictions on that. We don't sit on top of our community and say, hey, we have a feature that's competitive in our pro versions. We don't want you doing the same thing in the community editions. So we don't put anything that. The way we kind of look at it is a lot of users that are coming to us from they're working on Excel spreadsheets or they're working with systems they hate. And it's really kind of difficult to upheaval an entire enterprise at one shot. So what really makes a lot of sense for them is they can see, hey, wow, there's an open source edition of the product here. I can take a look at it. I can download it. I can install it on my computer, and I can start using it and playing with it. And if there's a point in time down the road that it makes sense that, wow, some of the features that the professional and the enterprise and the higher editions provide make sense, I can opt to go that route. And there's not really, a huge, cost to going that route. I think even our professional edition comes out to something like $1 a user a day. So it's nothing, atrocious, especially for an edition that also includes hosting and, things like that, whatnot. But the other nice thing about it is, one of the misconceptions that, and I know probably other open core companies might do this, is, once you move into those commercial editions, you might lose access to the source code. With us, you always will get access to that source code. So while the source code may not come under an open source license in the commercial realms, you still have that source code access. So you can still make all those modifications, make all of those changes, and not kind of feel like you have to be in somewhat of a walled garden that way from a technical standpoint.
So what would you say was the benefit of open source to your enterprise customers? Because I can see how you're benefiting from open source as a company, but for your large customers, the benefit of open source isn't normally gaining access to the source themselves. It's normally the benefits from participating in an open source community. And you've said that that isn't something that's possible with your higher end offerings. So what would you say to your large customers who want, for example, the team capability? Why does it matter that SugarCRM is open source to them?
So there still is an aspect of participating community, even though some of the higher editions don't have, aren't under an OSI approved license. We actually, and this is something that I've been kind of working on as our community manager. And I think if you probably look back at the past episodes, I think one of the questions that was asked there is that how do people contribute back to the community? And there really wasn't a very clear-cut answer. And what we've been working on now is kind of making a pathway to do that. We're happy to really say that we've tripled our number of code contributions in the past year versus any time that we've had in the past. But for our commercial customers, the benefit from an open solution really is, as opposed to a proprietary, is in the end, they still have the freedom to kind of do with what they need to. And especially like if you look at other things, if you look at other, software offerings in the CRM landscape, let's throw out the Salesforces, the, CRM Dynamics for Microsoft, even the Siebels. These are very, monolithic applications. You're not getting access to source code, and you're kind of restricted on where you can run it. You have a very specific platform stack you have to run on. In the case of Salesforce, you're actually stuck in running in a cloud, which is hosted in the United States, which I know for European customers can be a very problematic thing. With us, we give you the code, and even on the commercial side, you can run it wherever you want. We have an on-demand infrastructure that if you don't really want to have the worries of running it on your own system, you can run it there. If you said, hey, I need for regulatory purposes, I need to pull this behind my firewall. I need to do very specific customizations. I need to have very specific, because of the openness we have with our code base, you can actually do that. And others can also help participate, and helping them, they're not basically tied to us at Sugar being the primary ones the only people that can do the customizations or whatnot. They can go to a number of partners or providers all over the world and have them, implement Sugar their specific needs. If they want to run it in a different cloud stack, if they want to run it in Amazon Rackspace, Linode, wherever, they can do that with ease. And there's no There's no restrictions there. Their data is not locked up behind a firewall. They can move their data to wherever they want. They can change their deployment wherever in times they want. So maybe they started an on-demand infrastructure. They realize they need to move, into their own infrastructure or a different cloud infrastructure. They can do that. They have that portability in mind.
Right. So just looking at what's going on here, we'll move on to a different theme, I think, in a moment. But it seems to me that Sugar is very keen to have an open source community around its community edition. And then, with your framework change that you made a little while back, with your differentiation of your commercial versions based on function as well as being based on connectivity to proprietary systems, it seems to me that you want to have it both ways, that you want to have an open source community and you also want to have a locked-in proprietary product. Is that something that you're comfortable with, or is that still something that you're working through as a company?
It's the one thing we try to advertise against is the proprietary model, because we see that as the kind of the antithesis of what software should be, right? Companies these days, you should own your data, you should own where your destiny is. And the reality is if you look at, even if you go outside of CRM, and if you look at business applications in general, generally speaking, you're locked into one way of having to approach the problem, or one service, or one provider, and you don't really have a lot of flexibility in which you can go with. So I kind of, yes, I think a lot of this is the inherent problem with the open core, business model that you kind of run yourself into, and I can say, well, we're kind of providing a little bit of a value add, that for our commercial editions. And that's really kind of what our goal is. The core of what we do is open source. The core of our business, the core of what we're providing out to the community is open source. And we invite participation coming back into the product as well from our open source community. And we look to work with them actively. We have a number of open source people that and third-party developers that will contribute back to us. We have a number of businesses and organizations and startups that have basically bootstrapped themselves around SugarCRM. And, if you look at, other partnership programs around the world, and you've looked at other partnerships, with different entities, there's always this huge uptick of fees, and there's this huge cost for you to, become a partner of theirs, right? So if you want to be a Microsoft partner, a Salesforce partner, or Adobe partner, there's this huge upfront, basically being able to get yourself into the door to the point where you can actually start, participating. With us, we have with having the community edition model out there, it's really, really easy for somebody to get themselves bootstrapped around Sugar. They can download the software, they can build a couple extensions, they can work on any of the editions with ease. And yet they still have that, community edition, they can use and play with and work with. They can, build solutions with that, and then they can kind of grow themselves out from that. So I guess I kind of with the concept of us being with kind of both ways to an extent. I see us as trying to be as open of a company as we possibly can be. And we really try to keep a very open communication, with our customers, with our partners, with our users around the world. So yeah, that's and yes, there's definitely probably more we can do. There's probably better steps we can do, but I think we're definitely, if you probably look at from where we were a couple of years ago to where we are now, we've made some pretty incredible leaps and bounds and really opened ourselves up. We have an Open Plus developer partner community where we have a lot of our partners will actually help co-develop and participate in the code. We bring developers out for code sprints from both our partner community and our open source community, and they can really interact with engineers and help kind of shape the future of the product. So we attack the problem a number of different ways, and we're constantly looking for better ways to kind of help that.
John, I really appreciate your candor in answering those questions. I know Simon and I actually both have a pretty interesting stance about that, but appreciate your candor. Let's talk about some of those programs that you're talking about just now. I'm looking here on the website. I'm seeing Sugar Exchange. Do you want to explain what that is and how that fits into all this?
Sure. So Sugar Exchange is basically a directory of add-ons that people have built around Sugar. So one of the interesting things with Sugar versus maybe a lot of different other CRM companies or even business software is a lot of times it's either like the Unix or Windows approach, right? It's you take everything in the kitchen sink and that's your software delivered, or you kind of have this very little nimble kind of central core piece, and then you build add-ons and whatnot to do that. And so that's kind of what a lot of our philosophy is, because people are coming from CRM from all different angles, and maybe they're using CRM but don't realize, that the classic CRM model may not fit them or whatnot. What we try to do is we work with a number of either ISV partners and different, that provide different software. And then we also have a number of our partners. We have a number of community members and whatnot, that this is a place where that they can put software that they have up there, available, and list it. And, users can download it, they can install it within their Sugar instance. Some of these pieces of software are actually, connect over third-party web services and whatnot. So they might be just showing how Sugar and different systems interact with each other. But basically, the whole idea is that you combine kind of Sugar with a number of these add-ons for basically a complete business solution, for really together, Sugar with a number of different components to really make it very powerful for your organization.
This would be the equivalent, then, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but the equivalent of the CPAN for Perl, then?
Yeah, very, very similar to that. Here, there can be a little bit more variety with it. I mean, CPAN, kind of like Peckle on PHP is, very specific to, libraries and such not. Here, we kind of, say anything that's happening in the ecosystem. So this could be, even a complete, third-party service that just says, hey, we have a way that you can yank data out of Sugar, or, push data with Sugar. So it may not be a big add-on. It might be not something you can install directly into Sugar, but something that knows how to interact with it.
Yeah, and I have a question. Actually, we have a live chat room that we tape the show. People can interact with us. And Wild Will, whoever that is, that's an alias, I'm sure. One of my clients on a small marketplace seller with around 1,000 orders a day. Would you recommend SugarCRM to aggregate customer data from eBay, Amazon, et cetera, and then direct follow-up marketing to them? And so how complex would it be to integrate with the order customer data feeds back into Sugar?
Yeah, so I mean, Sugar would be a great solution for that. If you the nice thing about Sugar, I kind of equate it like when people talk to me about the LAMP stack and they try to compare it to, how a J2E stack works or .NET stack works. And I always say, where those stacks are very, very monolithic, you have this just gigantic application server that does everything. The LAMP stack is a very nimble pieces that just kind of interact with each other. And, when I try to explain the PHP or the Python, or Ruby or whatever kind of piece in the middle there, I often say it's just kind of this little broker. There's just this guy that just kind of hands things back and forth between people. He takes requests, he hands them to the database, he does some little calculations, does things there. That's kind of where the role of Sugar really fits with the software. It's this piece that you can say, hey, I like in this gentleman's example here, I have data on Amazon, I have data on eBay. I want to bring and import them easily into Sugar, which you could do. It as a very nice web services framework to do that. And then on the back end, Sugar has a campaigning tool which you can use, or you can integrate with a number of third-party campaigning tools if you see something else you like, or if you're already using a campaign tool. And then you can, basically automate that whole process very, very nicely. And at the same time, have a very good visual of seeing, hey, this is everything we have going on. This is how my customer flow is doing. I can do reporting and whatnot on top of it. It makes it really, really nice. So yes, I would recommend that.
And I also noticed that you're your title, at least as you told me, is the community manager for SugarCRM. What does that entail in terms of your day-by-day activities, and how did you get into that?
So great question. So I'm an engineer by trade. Actually, I started with Sugar nearly 5 years ago as an engineer on the product. So there's actually a lot of the code in the product that I actually wrote or helped contribute fixes towards, or broke, depending upon how you look at it. And over time, the one thing that I always I'm kind of an open source guy at heart. I really love the idea of community. I love the idea of being able to developers and whatnot. And maybe it's also kind of a unique, aspect, like we said in the early parts, I'm in Ohio here, and in Northeast Ohio, there isn't, it's not exactly the tech, mecca of, many places around the world. So kind of being able to interact with communities has always been something that's really been, very near and dear to me. And I always, saw Sugar as really having that really interesting potential where they could bring a lot to the table, that and really help solve a lot of user problems. So basically, I just over time I started interacting with our various people over the forums. I already had very good inlays with the PHP community, so I started applying to conferences on talks, and I started getting accepted by them, and I started kind of getting a little bit more, kind of buzz around that. I was offered to write a book a couple of years ago, and I took the plunge and stayed up till 3 a.m. For a good solid 2 months, and went ahead and powered through that. And then over time, I think Sugar kind of recognized that there was something I really had a lot of interest in, and they slated me about a year ago to move over to take over community management work. So community management's really, and I think if you probably talk to any of the community managers, they probably came into the job with little to no job title, and little to no kind of expectations a little bit to do. And really, for me, I since I come from a developer angle, the big thing I was trying to do is get our more entwined in the product and get them more kind of excited to be a part of it. So I helped in organizing a number of code sprints. We do developer uncons during our company conference, and we're going to start doing a couple of those on the road at various other events. I try to get myself on the road that way, and just try to really interact with our community very well. I help manage our forums. I help manage our code contribution process going in. I do a ton of blogging to kind of help promote a lot of what we're doing on the development side, but just kind of help promote us in general. So it's actually a lot of fun. It's almost in a setting kind of like ours. It's in a way kind of an early stage biz development sort of development role. And like when my mom asks me, or other families ask me, what I do. I try to explain to them, mom syntax, right? And basically I say, I'm kind of 1 foot in sales, 1 foot in marketing, 1 foot in engineering, 1 foot in product management, and then I realize I don't really have any more feet. So then I kind of stick my head back in support. So it's a lot of fun. I really enjoy it. It's an exciting, it's exciting because you're kind of that middle person between your company and your community, and you get to kind of evangelize for both sides of the table. So it's a lot of fun.
Now you just mentioned 2 months of late night. It must have been a small book. I know that books take a lot more than that.
Well, it was kind of a crazy scenario. I did a good portion of it ahead of time, and then for whatever reason, I kind of got held up. We had some kind of issues in contract I had to work with, and then all of a sudden there was a deadline of 2 months from now, and so then there was the cram of late nights. I kind of learned the lesson that if Jimmy Fallon's on TV, late, but if Poker After Dark is on TV, you're up way too late. So.
Indeed. So the totally went blank here. Oh yeah, so let's just get a little geeky for a second. What is SugarCRM written in, and how many thousands of lines of code do you imagine it is?
Oh, it's a crap load of code. I don't know exactly the right number.
That's the metric unit for code, I believe. The
metric
load.
unit.
Yeah.
A metric crap load.
So it's a ton of line of codes. I think probably it's one of the largest PHP projects out there, especially in the open source realm. And I've never peeked. I don't know how many lines of code Facebook is, but I mean, I imagine we've got a ton, for better or for worse. So it's written in PHP. There's also a good amount of JavaScript in the front end, just like all web apps. We're moving towards Ajax. We're working towards Ajax and stuff. We used YUI a lot in the past for our user interface library. Now we're kind of shifting stuff over to jQuery because it's a little bit more nimble. On the back end, this is kind of the nice thing about us, that we're very flexible on which you want to put it on the back end. So, if you're a Windows guy, you can use a straight Windows stack and everything will work out good, which is kind of very interesting. A lot of medium-sized businesses, they've already kind of invested all of their money in Microsoft products through, for quite some time here. So the idea of bringing a Linux box into the house kind of, freaks out the Microsoft system administrators. So you can deploy a straight Windows environment, IIS and a SQL Server and PHP, which PHP actually, in the last couple of years, it used to not run very well on Windows, but now it runs actually really nicely. The Microsoft team there is really put a lot of effort into making it work very well. So you can run it. So database size, we support SQL Server, MySQL. There's a community project out there that just got started about a month ago for Postgres support. So we're kind of interested to see where that's going, and that might be something we might fold in at some time down the road. Otherwise and PHP, we're also very open to what additions we support. We'll support anything really 5.2, 5.3, 5.4 is we don't officially support it, but doesn't also seem to be all that broken. It certainly helps that one of our lead architects on staff is the release manager for PHP 5.4 for the P project, so he kind of helps keep the compatibility in line there. So yeah, that's actually kind of the nice things is we're very not picky on the development on the platform that you, which really I think helps get people running a lot faster.
Now, has this been packaged for all the major Linux releases?
I don't think there used to be an Ubuntu one. I don't think we have packages much anymore. We have some fast stack installers that, for Windows and Linux, and I think there might be an OS X one still as well, that can kind of, get it installed relatively quickly. But there is not a package. It's a web app. It's really simple. You just download the file you want, set your permissions and roll. So, it's not really a ton of overhead. As long as you have a LAMP stack set up, it's not too bad. I don't think there's actually any packages, although if there's anybody on any of the distros that would love to make a package, come talk to me, and I'd love to help. I'd love to see that happen.
Cool. And I don't want to go too much back into the open source aspect of this again, but this is an open source show, so I need to talk about this a bit. The contributions that you get, I see you have not SourceForge, it's called SugarForge, where you have the thing, the source code in public for the community edition. How many of the contributions to move that forward are coming from the outside versus your internal engineers?
So we on a yearly basis, and again, I've really basically the last year and a half is when we've really we've really kicked our contributions program into gear and really started to get that going, which obviously takes a little bit of time and whatnot. Maintenance, an average release that's coming out is just about around the 10% mark of fixes are coming from outside of Sugar. That's not just bugs reported. That's actually the code fix. They gave us the code. We, put it in and it works. And so that's been a very start. And if you look at 10%, you're thinking, oh, wow, that's not really that great. But, if you think of kind of, a software kind of like ours, it's actually pretty really interesting that, and I think it's kind of a remarkable number, for us to kind of achieve towards. And we've been growing ever since. I think last year, at the end of last year, we had something along the lines of 100 code contributions from outside of our company. And this year, we're probably somewhere on the mark for, I'm guessing it's going to probably end up in the 150 or so range, which is kind of a nice, steady growth, coming out there. So, and it really helps out. We also have a repository on GitHub. So if you go to github.com/sugarcrm/sugarcrm_dev, you can fork us on there and grab the source code. And if you do pull requests back to them, that's where I come in and take a look at them and, and pull them back into the product. And we've got a lot of community members that kind of have got themselves started in that, where they've seen, problems that they saw in the code, and in the past there really wasn't for those to contribute back to us. People could put little codes, but now a dedicated set. Really, we love to see how the product, and especially it's very kind of important for the platform aspect of it, because people use Sugar in all sorts of ways that we never anticipate people using Sugar. We have, I've heard of one case where there's a scientific lab out there somewhere that's using Sugar to manage their test results, right? We have a number of different partners that will do all sorts of interesting integrations and really almost rip out all the CRM bits, but really kind of use the platform aspect of it and build interesting applications. So with that, it's really great to kind of see what people are doing, and then as they're kind of finding bugs with what we're doing, they feed those back to us, and then we can incorporate those back into the product for everybody to take a benefit from.
Right, right. So to drill down on those 2 points there, John, what sort of contributions are you getting in there? Is it mainly bug fixes, or are you getting new features coming in that way as well?
We actually get both. I would say probably the definite majority is bug fixes, because that's an easy way for somebody to get started. Because they're using the product, they're seeing, oh, I'm doing this, it's not working right. They find this stupid piece of code that caused the problem. They let us know. They contribute it back to us. If they're nice, they give us a test too, and we pull it back in. But we've had a number of different features we've pulled in that way. A really big case in point is we recently redid our calendar system from over the course of 2 releases. On 6.3, we made some change. Basically did the first half of the overhauling, and then in 6.4 we did the second half of it. And the basis for the 6.3 release of the calendar actually came from a SugarForge project, where somebody had took our calendar and did all sorts of changes to it to make it, much easier to use, very Ajax-y and whatnot. And we contracted and we worked with them, and we pulled the code right back into the product. And they actually continue to work with us today and kind of help us out. It's a really nice development shop out in Eastern Europe. And we had another project that we pulled in for iCal support back for 6.4. So that's really been a very big boon to help us out.
Right.
So
and are all those coming in from customers? Are all those coming in from customers, or are they coming in from companies that are also trading with SugarCRM independently of you?
Both, actually. We really, one of the things that helped get our contributions program really up in gear is that we had a number of partners and customers that mainly partners that they would do a whole bunch, and we kind of said, well, why don't you break the product? And once we kind of built a streamlined way to make that happen, it made it a lot easier. But on the flip side, we've all seen a lot of just random open source use, PHP developers, whatnot, that are doing work on, or they might have seen the project and some audits of the code and said, hey, well, this doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, and made fixes to it. And it's speaking to kind of those two features that we pulled in. Both of those were from individuals that we didn't have any sort of business relationship with beforehand. So those were kind of two it's not like they were a customer or partner or whatever. The one group was basically a dev shop that bootstrapped themselves on doing sugar development work, just very independently of whatnot. We saw kind of the work they were doing, and we saw the calendar work they were doing. We said, let's it's great, let's pull it into the product, let's start working with it. And then one was another gentleman that basically it was just kind of a one-off thing he did. He'd worked on it, and he'd had it up on SugarForge for quite some time, and we looked, said, this is a great feature to bring to the product, let's go ahead and do this. So it's been a mix. We see customers that feedback to us. We see community. We see just open source people. We see just developers. We kind of see a very big mix of people. That it's actually kind of quite surprising, the mix of people we get.
Right, right. So how do these contributions get back into your commercial code base? Do you have some sort of a contributor agreement, or what do you do? Do you buy the contributions from the contributor?
We have a contributor agreement that we require a contributor to sign. They had to do it once, and it's basically the standard garb there. Other than that, we have a number of different ways people do it. Either they'll submit a bug report to us, and then they'll have whatever the fix needing done in there as a part of the bug report. And then, basically we have a team, especially me, that will go through and look through these, they'll validate, how correct they are and whatnot, and pull them right into the product. They'll usually get incorporated in a point release or two. It just depends upon where we're at in a dev cycle. And the other way is through GitHub. People can, fork our code on GitHub. They can do a pull request back against the repository, which is actually the preferred way to do it, because it's actually a lot. It's a nice clean way to make changes. I actually get to be the one that I do a lot of the reviewing of those, and then I set them and we push them into the product. And then, like I said, usually within a release or two, just depending upon when the request comes in, it gets pulled back into the product.
Right, right. So you were also talking about more project-based uses of SugarCRM there. You talked about a research lab using it for their research samples. Do you have any interesting uses of the community edition. One of the users on the IRC was asking whether anyone has used SugarCRM, for example, to help with distribution of supplies in disaster relief. And I wonder whether you've got any cases like that you could tell us about.
We probably do. I don't doubt. We have a number. I don't know them off the top of my head. I apologize. But you can look at our website. We have a number of case studies people done. A lot of those are on the commercial edition of the product. But I hear all sorts of interesting stories about people using it. I have a friend of mine that uses Sugar for managing his home inventory. So in case his house burns down, he can print off everything that's in his home and hand it over to the insurance company so they can get it replaced faster. We have a number of different organizations that have been used it for things from class reunions to managing nonprofit members, donation management, all sorts of really, really, really interesting things. So the nice about it, if you really kind of boil Sugar down, and really kind of what the CRM is, it's just really, it's a relationship manager. And I'd argue, at its simplest level, it's a glorified layer on top of a database to basically automate a lot of those CRUD applications, right? So, but the value Sugar adds in there is it makes it building that with ease. And we have some features right in the product through Module Builder and Studio that you can go through. You don't have to have any coding knowledge whatsoever. And you can literally design out a web application, a Sugar application in minutes. And it's actually nice. We have a lot of implementers and resellers they can walk into a customer's office, with their laptop with an instance of Sugar on there. They can start talking through the solution that they're looking to build and what all the entities and modules and whatnot are being, and then go right through Module Builder and build it right in front of them. Obviously they have to take it, back with them to kind of do, some of the level of tweaks, or if there's going to be like some code customizations or, very specific things. But in terms of kind of the general, functionality and kind of getting an application scaffold, you could literally scaffold an application out if you have kind of what your design's going to be in a number of minutes. Within 15 or 20 minutes, you can really be rolling with things. And I think that's one of the huge ease of use things that Sugar, brings to the table. It's so easy to get going. You get the application going, and then you can jump into our development tools, which are GUI based in the product, and just start developing. You can start, writing an application. You can start designing out, what your application is going to look like. What are the fields going to look like? What are the forms going to look like? What are the relationships between modules going to look at? And you can do it relatively fast.
Very cool. Hey, we're almost out of time, but I just wanted to make sure that we covered everything that you wanted us to cover and make sure that we covered. Is there anything that we forgot to ask so far that you want to answer anyway?
I think you guys did a pretty good job. You hit the open source angle really, so that was a plus. No. It's, to be honest, I really welcome the questions on that. It's in all fairness, it's something that we get asked a lot in the community, and we get a lot asked in open source circles, and it's very good to have those questions come up and to kind of talk about them openly. And it's, we are always looking. We love open source. I personally love open source. We participate for an open source where I'm a board member on the OW2 consortium, which is a kind of a group of several open source kind of middleware applications like Sugar, Open Bravo, which I think is a guest next week. Not to plug ahead of time, and CM half your work for you. No. So a lot of different organizations that way. And we also recently joined the Open Foundation, and we're working with them and a number of different organizations like Jive and IBM of really helping drive that standard forward and building an open source kind of framework for managing activity streams and embedded experiences and whatnot. So there's a lot of really interesting things to do. And like I said, I'm very active in the PHP community, which is a lot of open source going on there, and it's a lot of fun. And I really I enjoy open source. Sugar really embraces the concept of open source of how we differentiate ourselves from the rest of the marketplace, especially in the CRM market, which is largely heavily proprietary vendors with very proprietary solutions that you kind of have to deploy in a place where they tell you to.
Right.
and we look to flip that entire model over on its head and saying, you take sugar, you make sugar to what you want it to be, and you put it where you want to be, and have at it.
So I noticed that actually one of the other members of OW2 has done a licensing change recently. I don't know if you'd spotted that Spago BI has relicensed from, I think they were using GPL before, and they're now using a Mozilla Public License version 2. Have you considered relicensing that way?
Interesting question. So I think initially our initial license sugar was available on, it was kind of our own license, but it was kind of an MPL derivative. And as time has kind of moved on, we've moved from there to GPL v3, and then now we're at an AGPL v3. The licensing question comes up quite a bit. It's something that's always on our radar. I'm always looking at open source licensing and seeing what makes sense, not only from our company angle, but also from a community engagement angle, right? Because I think that's one of the hangups around GPL these days is there's always this that people don't really want to become engaged with GPL projects because they feel there's this viral nature to it or something, right? Which is fine, and I understand where people come from. That I agree with it on a lot of points. Where a BSD license, a lot of takes for a developer especially makes a lot more sense to become engaged with, right? Because you don't kind of have those things coming over your head to think about. So yeah, I mean it's always something we're looking at. We're always looking at what the licensing is out there. We're looking at how our community engages with us, what communities we want to be more engaged with, and what licenses that they like to become engaged with in order to be a part of it. So yeah, it's always something on our radar.
And since you're a fan of the show, you know what the final 2 questions are, so go ahead and answer them.
So VI is if I have the choice between the two, Emacs and VI, it would be VI. I use that a lot more. But actually, my main tech editor is JEdit. It's a Java-based editor that is really nice. Actually, you can use it on Windows, Linux, or Mac, which is really nice because for a while, I have my Mac as my main computer, but I have like Linux VMs and Windows VMs for my engineering days of having to test on like 15 different stacks at once. So it's nice to have a consistent editor that I could just copy my profile across. Plus, really extensible and works really, really nice. So that would be actually quite. And I don't know if it's just the Skype doing it to me, but I'm completely blanking on question number 2.
Question number 2, of course, is favorite scripting language, to see if you're in my camp or not.
Well, I have to represent my and I'm going to have to say PHP just because that's what, for better or for worse, that's what I've been raised on. But, I love to look at some of the different ones. I love some of the concepts that are done in Python and Ruby and some of the other languages. I have an affection for, functional programming languages as well. So I represent my peeps in the PHP world.
Fair answer. Well, it's been really fun chatting with you today and picking up answers to a lot of our questions for what SugarCRM has been doing and is doing in the future. So I want to thank you for being on the show.
Thank you. It's been a lot of fun and glad to be a part of it.
Very good. Very good. That was John Meredith. He's the community manager for SugarCRM. What do you think, Simon?
Well, I've been familiar with Sugar for quite some time and had lots of conversations with the company. That they actually are a company, John Roberts and then their current CEO are both very committed to open source business, and they deserve a lot of credit for that. Having said that, I keep on running up against this division between the community edition and the actual product that they sell service on. And I worry that it's not possible to do business with them and also benefit from open source. You have to either choose Software Freedom and their CE Community Edition, or you have to choose commercial service that you really can't go to another provider from. So I'm always conflicted when I look at SugarCRM. It's interesting software. The people who started it are great proponents of open source, and yet it seems to have a fundamental tension at its heart. What do you think, Randall?
Well, it's interesting. It's obvious that that they're leveraging sort of the notion of open source. I think it's more like open source in garb, but not necessarily at the core all the way down. Although this being called an open core application, sort of the antithesis of that. But I think at some level it's a little weird that they've got a commercial model that's basically monetizing the work that's being done for the community edition. I know, and I'm trying to think how that's different from what Red Hat's doing with Fedora and all the other things that have an upstream, totally open source thing, and then they apply some commercial stuff downstream. Maybe you can help me distinguish those kinds of cases from what SugarCRM is doing. But I'll just say also on their benefit that there's an awful lot of code available in SugarCRM that seems to be solving a lot of problems for people, and the community edition is usable. It's not like you have to always buy some piece of it. Like back at OSCON, I remember walking around the show floor trying to find more guests for this show, and I would start listening to the pitch of something, and then all of a sudden they would say, so I'd ask, is this all open source? And they go, well, all of it except for this piece that you have to buy in order for any of it to work, or all of it except for you have to subscribe to our service to get your alerts popped up. And I go, well, that's not really open source, and why are you here? So this sounds at least, though, that there's some component of this that I can download and use to my benefit in my organization. I can modify it. I can probably send changes back for if I find patches or feature changes. So there is some component to that. Simon, do you want to clear up the difference between this and, say, the Red Hat Fedora relationship?
Oh, well, I mean, Red Hat are on a completely different basis, because what they're doing is they're selling service on open source, which is maintained in the community. Whereas what Sugar are doing is they have a community edition, which is open source, which you can use without having a commercial relationship with the company, where it is possible to make pull requests to push code back into it. But their commercial product is on a track where to use it you have to have a relationship with the company. Were you to stop having that relationship with the company, you would no longer be able to continue using the software. You wouldn't be able to go to another supplier because the software you're depending on can only be sourced and serviced by the company. And so there could be no white label version of SugarCRM. Whereas with Red Hat, you've got CentOS, which is exactly the same as Red Hat, but white label. With SugarCRM, the thing you could have as an unbranded version of is their community edition. Their commercial product is something which you can't fork because it's got plenty of components in it that can only be used under commercial licenses. And then they're also using the AGPL, which means that they're pretty much ensuring that no one else is going to offer a competing web service either, because the AGPL creates a very uneven playing field if one of the participants doesn't have to obey the license, which of course SugarCRM don't have to. So the way that they're doing things is completely different to what Red Hat are doing, where Red Hat are offering service packages on open source software that's genuinely maintained in the community, whereas Sugar are maintaining an open source project that you can use, or a commercial product that is based on a common ancestor that you can use, but there's no crossover between the two things.
Yeah, and you've seen this in other companies as well. I mean, you're probably more observant of all the different ways that licenses affect business outcomes. What do you think this does for? It's not just damaging goodwill in that sense. Is it actually maybe harming their potential application and customer base?
Well, I think it's pretty questionable how valuable it is to cite open source in your ancestry these days, because more and more buyers are looking for software freedom rather than free stuff. And the premise of SugarCRM is that there's a no-cost edition somewhere that you can use if you're cash poor. Whereas today, you look at the way that open source is being used in the market, it's much more about the flexibility and freedom and lack of lock-in that comes from software freedom. So when I was with another company previously, we looked at getting a CRM solution. We looked at Sugar and we realized that, well, we may as well go with another proprietary provider that had slightly lower costs, because as far as we were concerned, Sugar behaved just like a proprietary provider for us. We didn't get the freedom and lack of lock-in that we would have got from an open source solution. And I wonder whether they actually do harm their overall potential market size by trying to maintain control like this. I've been writing quite a lot recently in InfoWorld about control versus influence, and I wonder whether the time has come to trade some of that control for some influence in the open source community, which isn't present when you try and control outcomes.
Simon, as always, a very insightful answer there. I appreciate your ability to speak directly to this subject. Speaking of speaking directly to the subject, we have a number of upcoming guests, not too many the number being 4 right now, because I haven't been filling my fourth quarter schedule yet. I keep promising to do that. My weekends have been really jammed up doing other things. But next week, if you like this week's enterprise-y bias, you're going to love next week, because next week we have Open Bravo, which is an ERP system. Enterprise, what's ERP stand for? Enterprise, Simon? You know? ERP.
ERP, Enterprise Resource Planning.
There we go. So we'll see how that goes for next week. The week following that, we're going to have some people from Enterprise DB who are one of the commercializers of Postgres. All the stuff they do is in open source, apparently, so that we don't have an open core issue around that. They're just providing services on top of Postgres. But I really wanted to do a Postgres update because we haven't had. I mean, Postgres is the very first show that I did here for Floss Weekly, something like 5 years ago. God, has it been that long now? And I wanted to give an update because Postgres has gone a huge ways towards modern replication, common table elimination, updates with the new standards, things like that. So we're going to have somebody on from Enterprise DB to talk about that. Then the Twisted Python framework, which is a Python framework to allow event-driven programming being used as like the guts of web servers and mail servers and all sorts of cool things out there. And finally, the last scheduled guest I have right now is KVM, which of course is the magical virtualization software that's being used in so many of these modern cloud implementations. I think we have a couple people from Red Hat actually coming and talking about KVM. We've got a lot more coming up. I have the slots open for Q4, but I haven't actually sent out the email. I hope to do that this weekend. So we'll have a lot more people to announce. You can watch the Floss Weekly Google Plus user page, whatever it's called, and you'll see announcements as I fill in those slots. I've got some really exciting ones coming up. You can follow us there on Google Plus. You can also follow Floss Weekly, all one word, on Twitter and Identica. You can go to twit.tv/Floss, and there is a spreadsheet linked from there of everybody I am contacting or talking to. If there's somebody you want on the show that's not on that list, have the project leader email me, merlin@stonehenge.com. The email address is right there on that page. You can follow me personally, Merlin, M-E-R-L-Y-N, on Twitter and Identica. But mostly I'm talking on Google Plus these days. So look for Randall L. Schwartz on Google Plus, and you'll see 5 to 10 interesting postings a day on there of things that I find as I'm wandering through the net. I'll be at DragonCon in Atlanta from August 30th to September 3rd. I think I can finally announce this. I'm going to be on a panel. I don't know how I hold this off. I'm going to be on a panel with Bruce Schneier, Mr. Security himself, the guy that's been talking about the whole thing about how flying in the TSA is all security theater. I think he invented the term security theater. And I'm going to be on a panel with him there at DragonCon and a few other panels as well. I'm giving a 1-hour intro to Git there. I'm also on the Standard Hacker 101 and 201 panels. If you're at DragonCon or near the Atlanta area that weekend, watch my tweets or tweet at me, and I'll see if I can meet up with you. That's enough plugging for me. Simon, what do you want to plug today?
A lot of things going on. Down there on my tagline, if you're watching the video, is the new open source membership program that the Open Source Initiative has launched. I'm currently the president of OSI, and I encourage all viewers and listeners to visit opensource.org and to consider joining the Open Source Initiative to help us push forward open source advocacy and campaigning worldwide. If you'd like to get together in person, I'm going to be in Liverpool this weekend. I'm going to OggCamp, which is the UK's premier celebration of digital culture and digital freedom. And I'll be speaking there on behalf of the Open Rights Group about the communications data bill that's going through the UK Parliament at the moment. Then coming up at the beginning of September, I'm giving one of the keynotes at the Open Source Academic Conference, OSS 2012, in Tunisia. And if you're going to that conference, I would love to meet you. Do send me an email to make sure that we don't miss each other. Coming up towards the end of September, there are some summits for Open Forum Europe happening in Brussels, and I will be speaking at those. And then coming up in October is Open World Forum, which is Europe's biggest get-together for open source advocates and practitioners. That's happening in Paris from the 11th to the 13th of October. And I very much encourage you to come along to that. And then finally, within this horizon is the Document Foundation's conference, which is happening in Berlin, the 16th to the 19th of October. And you're just in time for the call for papers for that. If you would like to propose a paper about LibreOffice or open document format or open source and office productivity, now's the time to go to documentfoundation.org and look for the link to the conference and make a submission. I'm still writing every week for InfoWorld and Computer World. The best place to find the link to all of the things that I'm writing is on my website, which is webmink.com. You'll see if you're watching the video that the tagline has conveniently changed to show you that URL. And I've also recently published a report at O'Reilly Media, which is a free report you can download from their website. And if you dig around on my website, there's a link to that too. I think that's everything, Randall. We must be over time by now, surely.
Well, we're certainly getting close to the end of time, but not until the guys from TNT actually wander in and start stealing my mic do I have to really worry entirely. And Simon, thank you again for doing the show 2 weeks in a row with me, and I'm glad we actually got to say goodbye this time. You got cut off suddenly last week, so thanks for sticking all the way through to the end of the show this time.
It's a pleasure. Well, I don't know what happened last week because I've got really hot fiber broadband here now, and for the first time since it was installed, it just cut dead on me last week at the end of the show. It's, this week, so far, touch wood, it's been working out okay.
Very good, very good. Simon, once again, thanks you for your insight and everything else we have on this show. And I'll say to my audience what I say every week, which is we'll see you again next week on FLOSS Weekly.